Hello everybody, it's Mike Levin, a director at a digital marketing firm here in the great city of New York on Wednesday, February 18th, 2015, around 8:30 a.m. A little late walking the big guy, but I thought I'd shoot a video today anyway, just to keep my momentum going. And I've got two things to talk about today. The first was a sudden flash of insight I had yesterday, solving a related problem for doing an equivalent of my work journal that I do in GitHub and publish through GitHub.io on MikeLevinSEO.com, but to do a much more private one for my coworkers so I can think out loud to myself and use actual client names and their issues as I type in a way that I can share with my coworkers. The problem is that a text file like that sitting on your hard drive ain't so easy to share, so we've been using Google Docs as a way of sharing our critical workflow documents. And it occurred to me that couldn't I get that text file in Google Docs too, since Google Docs became Google Drive, and it's a lot like a file system letting you upload just about anything there. And then it occurred to me, Google's been competing with Dropbox with their Drive product, Google Drive, which is interesting because it's the second product to be named Google Drive. There was one prior, which scanned your hard drive and let you sync all your files to Google Docs, which they had subsequently renamed Drive, I guess, to keep in sync with that effort. But it's really two separate products. One is a thing very much geared towards your desktop operating system that you install, just like a native program, and it runs like Dropbox on your local hardware. And then the other is, you know, Office software in the cloud. And I was able to share that text file so that it comes up under the folder of shared files for my coworkers. Problem solved. And that made me think that if I could do that with a .html file, couldn't I do that with a .py file and give a Pipulate server access to a local file that you're maintaining your Pipulate user functions in, which you're actually able to run right from your desktop, running little experiments, maybe using the Python interactive command line program to test things. And as soon as you have it working, it's just magically available to Pipulate, which does an import through the Google API and loads those functions as if they were native modules using the evil eval statement. And all you need to do is buy into the Google way of doing things. Drink the Google Kool-Aid, such as it were. And I've already gone that route, at least for the foreseeable future, on this latest crop of tools until I can break some dependencies that are very hard to break, like the GData API and the best API to a web spreadsheet that's available right now, even much better than EtherCalc, the free and open source equivalent that's out there right now, but its API just isn't everything that Google Docs is. So that's the first thing I have to talk about. That was the Brainstorm, a new approach to user functions in Pipulate that is just going to be so natural as to be transparent to anyone who's trying to learn Python. You get something working on your desktop, it's also working on your instance of Pipulate. I, of course, won't let this work on the main Pipulate.com instance for the public, but that's understandable. You can't nuke my server, but you can nuke your own servers over and over again too, especially if you're using Linux and it's just a matter of resetting it. So it's a new way of thinking, and really shows the power of things like the eval statement. Turns it into something of a meta process, because you discover things and you use the data that you discovered to adjust your program code. You have a rapid iteration cycle that lets your whole customized instance of Pipulate evolve incredibly quickly. And of course, if you care to, you can contribute anything you do back to the GitHub project, and I'll make it a set of the user functions that are distributed for everyone. So that's the first thing. The second thing is a bit more complex, and it's an explanation of the lack of modularity in the Pipulate function, but it's not really a function, it's a generator with little yield statements all over the place to send little bits of user interface update to the Pipulate web user interface. So a generator looks like a function, but instead of using the return keyword, you use the yield keyword. And you can use it all over the place. So instead of one big return at the end of your function, you get lots of little returns or yields all over the place. And it's a great approach to streaming, because when you're doing a larger complex task that might take a long time to deal with and have repeated attempts to connect to sometimes flaky APIs, you want to keep the user informed and even entertained. Now the problem is that yield affects your execution order. It freezes the program, does something, and comes back to where it was frozen. So if you want to modularize, and especially if you want to continue sending these yields back to update the user's web interface inside a call to a subfunction or a module, then you have to yield also from that subfunction. Now it's not as simple as a return value at that point. You have to actually iterate through the generator. You create an instance of the generator. So instead of saying return value equals function being fed parameters, and then you use the return value, you say bubbles equals instance of bubbler. And then you iterate through it with a statement for bubble in bubbles, and then you yield its return. Now what you're doing is you're bubbling up yields. And that's not a problem, except this is really a tale of two patterns that don't go well together. That's the first one. It's using a yield to stream a constant flow of little bits of data from a function. The other pattern I'm using is the way you program defensively against flaky APIs, which in this case is gdata, and I create an outer loop, so for x in range 5, for example, and then on each iteration through that loop, I do a try except, which is Python's way of gracefully surviving something that didn't survive. And if it works even once, it exits the iterator and holds a value that would not have existed otherwise. And if it gets through the iterator the whole time and has not succeeded at the try statement once, it doesn't have that value, and you can stop code execution and update the user on what happened gracefully. You can even update the user through every retry, so that if you set a long wait period, like 10 seconds between retries, you can keep the user entertained. Now the problem is when you use this defensive programming pattern against flaky APIs in combination with the yield statement sending constant feedback to the user, if you have to keep creating instances of generators and bubbling up tiny messages through nested generators, and if you embrace modularization, you might be doing this 2 or 3 levels deep, so the bubbles have to be handed all the way back up repeatedly, each time emptying out the entire iterator to make sure that all the messages reach the user and that it's executed the generator fully. And the code becomes incredibly obscure and esoteric and not readable at all. And it is really against modern programming best practice principles to not modularize. But in this case, where modularization results in an unreadable mess, the decision might be, in this case, as was my decision, to take advantage of the very terse and explicit nature of Python. It's easy to read, it's easy to write, the code is slimmer and less decorated with syntactic sugar than other programming languages. So it's an argument for actually not reusing code when it starts to work against you. And that's what I did in the Pipulate generator function. And I've incurred the wrath of at least one internet troll, you know, telling me that I was going back to the 60s and that I was wrong and that he was going to do better than show me it was possible, but to do the code for me, and then he just disappeared. So, such is life on the YouTubes. I certainly don't mind it, and I've always been a big fan of feeding the trolls because, you know, they're expressing something. They have something to express. It's whatever. They've got a hunger they need to feed. And when you play into it, generally, it ends bad unless you're skilled at it and you use it to enrich and enliven the whole experience. There's always something to learn. And in this case, I would certainly like to find a better way to combine the two patterns I consider are quite critical here: defensive programming against flaky APIs with continuous streaming of input to the user, or output to the user through yield under Flask, which is the way streaming is accomplished in this case. So I issue it as a challenge. If people have a better way and can modularize the Pipulate generator in the project at mclevin/Pipulate at GitHub, please do so. I am more than open to it. And so anyway, that's the two things I had to talk about today. I am going to attempt to actually implement that user function approach using the 2 Google Drive products today. And hopefully I'll have an update for that for you soon, and that'll be available for you to start using like immediately. Pipulate can be installed and used today. I'll make it even easier with Linux doing it, so you don't even have to do installs, and maybe give access to the big centralized server at pipulate.com that's hosting the app for Flying Point Digital. Thanks for joining me. Hope to talk to you soon. Don't forget to subscribe, and as usual, great time to refer people into the videos.